My name is Maynard Johnny Jr. I'm a Salish artist. My dad's from Penellicut Island and my mom's from Cape Madron Quadra Island. So I'm Weewakai and Penellicut. And I've been doing Salish art for about 30 years and working with Pacific FC for the last 4 years. We chose to do the salmon because of the resilience of salmon. If you think about how salmon come into this world, they leave wherever they're born and they go thousands and thousands of miles away. And in that thousands and thousands of miles, they avoid fishermen, they avoid whales, seals, all kinds of creatures trying to hunt them. And they go all the way to Hawaii or go all the way to Europe or whatever and come back to where they were born. So that kind of reminds me of Indigenous people, the resilience of our people surviving the oppression of Canada, and the Catholic Church played a big role in that as well. It's great with Pacific FC and their soccer players wearing my design on the jersey. That will raise awareness, will raise questions. Why is Pacific FC doing this? Hopefully we can, raise the awareness amongst other Canadians to have a better understanding of what happened in this country, and also create inspiration for youth to know that they can see something they can relate to, an Indigenous design on a jersey. My hope is to inspire youth to want to strive to continue to become an artist, become a professional athlete, or become anything they want to become, as long as they set their mind to it and work hard. I find that's a pretty big theme in the last probably 5 to 10 years, is being able to see our people doing things that we normally wouldn't have saw them in movies, TV shows, playing professional sports, all these things that create inspiration. As I became an artist, I realized how hard it actually is. Even though I was really good at what I did, it was still hard to break into the market. It was still hard to become a professional artist. I had to work a lot and I had to suffer setbacks or have somewhat of a failure. And I realize now that that actually made me smarter and stronger and more resilient to move forward. A lot of our communities grew up in poverty, grew up being oppressed by the Indian Act, which is still intact today. So all these things, I could get into hours and hours of discussing why it's a great opportunity. And I hope that Pacific FC will take it further and further as we move forward, creating that awareness. Most professional teams don't wear their jersey with a theme, like an Indigenous theme. It's always a warm-up, one-off, one night out of the year, which is great, but it's a small step, and other teams got to follow Pacific FC. Other organizations have it. It's just one day. One day isn't going to create the awareness. One day isn't going to solve anything. It's time to start really making change, and Pacific FC's working towards that, and I want to work more with them, and I want to push them harder to make even more awareness, to raise that bar for other teams to follow their footsteps. So I think it generates a great positive message for especially Indigenous youth, but all youth, to realize they can become professional athletes or artists and have their work garnered on a professional team's jersey or anything that they set their mind to. But it just was sort of an idea that came about, and then it snowballed into what it is now. The idea of wanting to represent truth and reconciliation, and what I pushed Pacific FC and any organization to do is do more. You're not doing enough. And I know that's very firm and stern kind of thing, but the idea is to keep raising that awareness. Especially, I'm realizing using my art as a vehicle to get me into organizations, corporations, universities, whatever. It allows me to express what's going on with Indigenous people and the history of Indigenous people in this country. I realize truth and reconciliation, people hear that and they think it's happening. And it is happening, but it's happening very slowly. So I think with Pacific FC, working with them, I think, is creating that awareness, creating the next step to truth and reconciliation, because truth and reconciliation is a long, drawn-out process now, I've realized. And it's really exhausting as an Indigenous person to have to tell my story over and over and over. At the same time, I realized I have to share my story in order for people to understand, but it's also their job to go from there and do more study of what the residential school is, what the Indian Act is, the potlatch ban, the 60s scoop. And there's so much oppression in between all of that. We weren't allowed to have lawyers until 1952. We weren't allowed to be reserved till 1950s. My grandparents couldn't go past grade 8. So what kind of future could you have with a grade 8 education? What kind of future could you have if you couldn't leave the reserve? And then that trickles down generation to generation because they weren't able to become what other Canadians had the opportunity to become. So there's all kinds of small little things in between the residential school, the Indian Act, the potlatch ban, the 60 scoop, all these things that happened to our people. There's all kinds of other things that held us down and not allowed us to grow as people. We're still here, we're working hard to make things work in this country together, and we need Canadians alike to want to do the same thing. Study into what the Indian Act is that's still intact today. Study more about what the oppressions were done to Indigenous people so that we can change the legislations and the laws in this country so that we don't have the Indian Act anymore. Because I find if you don't share your story truthfully, if you sugarcoat it, or if you try to be, not scare people or make people feel guilty, then they won't get it. But if you put it right there, lay it right out in front of them, they start to be like, whoa, this is really intense, and I am a little guilty, I am a little scared, or I am a little worried what's going to happen. And it's like, it's not the goal. The goal is to help you understand. So, and hopefully working with Pacific FC, we'll be able to do this. We'll be able to continue raising the awareness, raising the questions so that Canadians will understand what happened and what we need to do to move forward.